You're listening to the Adventurous Reinvention podcast. I'm Allison Boyle, aka She Dreams of Alpine, and this is the show that's dedicated to all the adventurous spirits out there who have either been transformed by the outdoors or are interested in what it looks like to step into a new, adventurous, and courageous kind of identity in their life. It doesn't matter what your background is in the outdoors, what age you're starting at, or where you grew up. If you're curious about the outdoors and using adventure as a way to reinvent yourself, you're in the right place. I'll be sharing all kinds of personal adventure stories, lessons I've learned from the mountains, teaching what I know about the outdoors and leadership, and interviewing some amazing adventurous women all along the way. I've been coaching women on becoming safe, confident, and self-sufficient backpackers and leaders of their own adventurous lives since 2018, and I know exactly what big fears and self-doubts can pop up along the way. I have so much to share with you, so let's dive in. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Adventurous Reinvention podcast. You are listening to episode 23, and today I want to talk about something that has completely transformed the way that I move through life, both on and off the trail. So this is something that I first started learning in the mountains long before I even had the words for what that concept is. And now, like years later, it's a core part of how I coach myself, how I coach my clients, and even how I shape the way that I experience the world. So what I'm talking about here is the power of shifting our internal dialogue. Our brains are literally the worst little, pardon my French, shit talkers sometimes. And in order to get out of our comfort zone and do things that we've never done before, we have to learn the tools that will help us with that side of our brain that just wants to tell us something is not possible, that we should give up, all of the things, all of the mind drama that we have about going after big goals or things outside of our comfort zones or big dreams that we have. So what I want to talk about today is how adventure actually naturally teaches us self-coaching. If you've never heard that word before, don't worry, I'm going to explain it a little bit more. But adventure naturally teaches us self-coaching, and how when we become aware of this, we can actually start using these tools, these self-coaching tools, to shift our experiences on the trail and in our lives. Because here's the thing, before I even knew what mindset work was, right? The mountains were already teaching me so many lessons. And now as a certified life coach, I get to see exactly how those two worlds, adventure and self-coaching, both of those worlds, how they go hand in hand together. And inside my program, the Adventurous Reinvention Experience, which by the way is opening for enrollment very soon, I get to teach women how to shift their thinking, like on purpose, instead of waiting for it to happen by accident. Sometimes we can feel so passive, or maybe that's not the right word. We can feel so beholden to our thoughts, right? And what's so powerful is we have a lot more power over the conversation that's going on in our heads. So that is where coaching comes in. And this is how we can make change happen fast in our lives. And this is how we can stop letting life happen to us and start taking back some of our own personal power and making things happen for us, right? So today I just wanted to give you a sneak peek at some of this and some of these concepts and a glimpse into how powerful that this work can be when you start bringing it into your own life. But before we dive in, I do have a very exciting announcement, which you might have already heard me talk about. The enrollment for the Adventurous Reinvention Experience is opening very soon. We only open this once a year, so it's a big deal, and we're opening it in early April. So if you've been craving a change, whether that's feeling more alive in your life, stepping into maybe a more bolder, courageous, adventurous version of yourself, or finally breaking free from the fear that self-doubt and all of those things that kind of have been keeping you stuck or holding you back, then this is your official invitation. The Adventurous Reinvention Experience is also not just a coaching program. It is a full-on transformational experience that blends mindset coaching with real-world adventure. So over the summer, we'll be working together for 4 months. And over the summer, you'll learn powerful self-coaching tools that will help you learn how to shift your mindset, rewire limiting beliefs, get into action on those dreams and those goals that you have. You're going to learn how to reconnect with your adventurous side, whether in the outdoors or how you show up in life. You're going to get to be part of an incredible group of women who are all pushing their edges, making big changes. We're going to be doing all of that work together. And the best part is at the end of the summer, we will bring it all together on that epic group backpacking trip where we take everything that you learn and we live it out together on the trail. It's like one of my favorite ways to end that experience is kind of bringing that work together and reminding ourselves that on life and mountains, it is the same. And this is where we can just kind of really hone in those concepts. And this is where real transformation happens, not just in theory, but in action. So doors open in early April. And anybody who's on my wait list will get first access. So if you're even on the fence or thinking about joining us in that experience, I really want to recommend that you get on the wait list now. There are limited spots. There's only 24 spots in this experience. So if you want to join the wait list, go to shedreamsofalpine.com/ARE. I'm going to link that in the show notes as well. But again, that's shedreamsofalpine.com/ARE. All right, let's get into today's podcast episode. Okay, if you had met me before I found the outdoors, you would have met a very completely different version of me. I never saw myself as an adventurer or courageous, and I definitely wasn't the kind of person who pushed her limits, right? And I probably even saw myself as kind of a bit lazy. And I remember hating cardio as a kid, actually. Like I hated running the mile in PE. I did play some sports, but most of the sports that I picked involved less running. The less running I could do or cardio that I could do, the better, right? And then as I transitioned into college, I didn't really have anything like that I was leaning into. And I kind of just didn't really have anything that sparked my interest in that area. So most of the time as a young adult, a kid, I was stuck in my own head most of the time. I had a lot of stories about like who I was and like what defined me and all the things that were holding me back from things, right? In particular, I definitely had a big fear of looking out of place or like being too shy. Those were two of my big stories. Is like, I'm a shy person, I'm too shy, right? Or I was afraid to look silly, like I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was talking about. You know, that's why like education was so important to me as a kid, because I wanted to feel like I knew what I was talking about. And so sometimes I would not do things or sign up for things where I would be like new because I was just worried about looking silly, right? And I was worried about looking awkward. I had a big fear of those things as a kid. It wasn't until I went through my divorce right after college. So I had gotten married young and then got divorced young as well, where I started to kind of be sick of my own stories, sick of always being afraid to do things, sick of not like signing up for the opportunities that I had, and just kind of like sick of my own internal dialogue, right? I talk a little bit more about this in podcast episode 2 of this podcast. I think that podcast episode is called Reinvention Story Part 1, where I talk about going from being a Texas city girl to becoming adventurous outdoorsy. So if you're interested to learn more about that story, go ahead and give that episode a listen. But the short story is I decided one year after kind of like losing myself a little bit and kind of going off the deep end and drinking and just kind of, I don't know what the word to call it, just kind of rebounding and being like, nothing is meaningful. I ended up being like, this is not how I want to live. And I decided at the beginning of one year to enter what I call now a year of yes, where I decided I was going to say yes to opportunities that came my way, even if it freaked me out. And through that year of yes, again, I talk more about this in podcast episode 2. So I am kind of flying through that a little bit here. But in that year of yes, I got invited on my first backpacking trip in Yosemite with a group of coworkers, and I had never gone backpacking before, but I decided to say yes to that opportunity because it was my year of yes. And the mountains and that trip showed me a different side of myself. They showed me a side of myself where I was strong I was capable of so much more than I thought I was. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to do it, but I did it. And I was like, holy crap, like, wow, I never would have imagined I could do that. And it showed me this side where like, maybe I was adventurous. Like maybe I had what it takes, right? For me, everything shifted after that trip. What I didn't realize at the time though, was that it wasn't just like the trip, the external experience of the trip that shifted things for me. It was my internal dialogue that was also shifting. There wasn't anything fundamentally different about me after the trip compared to before, because I didn't know about training. I didn't have any experience. I wasn't taking any programs necessarily at the time. I was really the same person before the trip as I was after the trip, theoretically. It wasn't like I was this magically like strong or fast athlete or adventurer all of a sudden just because I went on one backpacking trip. No, like I was so slow on that trip. I think I've mentioned this before, but if I remember correctly, our first day we were going up the Mist Trail. It was the trail to get to Half Dome, but we were staying at Little Yosemite Valley Campground. And I think that trail from the trailhead of Mist Valley, I forget the Happy Isle, I think it's called Happy Isle Trailhead. Anyways, that trailhead up to Little Yosemite Valley Campground, I think it took me like 7 hours, which I forget the mileage, so it's hard to put that into perspective. But if I'm going to like compare it, I've gone back and done that trail several times after that first trip. That was in like 2013. And the same trail only takes me like 2 or 3 hours now. So you can just tell, like I was slow, like I didn't know what I was doing. I had a really heavy pack. I was scared like of half the things going on. I was like, why am I here? I don't belong here. All the things. But what changed was my thoughts about myself before and after that trip. I went from being the kind of person who was like, yeah, there's no way I could do something like that, to being the kind of person who thought, like, I love the way I felt on this trip and I'm going to figure out a way to be this kind of person. And I was like all in on that thought. I'm like, I'm going to figure out a way to be the kind of person who does this all the time. And that changed everything, like quite literally, because, here I am today. I mean, after that trip, it was like 2013. I really like honed my skills in the mountains and like went all in for like 7 years. But after that, I decided to become an outdoor educator, create She Dreams of Alpine, this business. And I've been doing that now for full time for 6 years. So I've come a long way from that very first version of myself. And, when I first started hiking and backpacking and climbing and mountaineering, I didn't really know about coaching. Like I hadn't really heard that concept of coaching per se, like especially the concept of self-coaching and like coaching yourself and like for even personal little things like going backpacking, right? I guess for me back then, coaching felt more like something that you do as an executive, or maybe if you were an elite athlete and you had a coach, right? I didn't realize at the time how powerful it was just for myself and my life and the things that I wanted. And I also didn't realize that what I was learning out in the mountains, I was like already learning a lot of the lessons that coaching has to offer when I was out there on the trail. And that's kind of what I wanted to dive in a little bit today on, is like, especially the three biggest concepts. There were really three big concepts that I was like learning out there on the trail before I even had the lingo or like the words for coaching concepts. So I'm going to go through those today. The first concept is something that you may have heard me talk about before, but it's about life being 50-50. So when I first discovered coaching and I came across my very first coach, it was about 2018, like right around the time I was thinking about creating a business. I think I was just starting out as a blogger. That's where my mind was. And I discovered coaching. And I remember my coach then at the time described life as being this 50-50 experience. And that means, like, if you've never heard me say that before, you've never heard that concept, it means that it's both good. It has its both good moments and it has its bad moments, right? Being a human means that we navigate both sides of those spectrums. And what I found most interesting when I learned about that concept from my coach, like, first of all, I really loved the simplicity in which she described it. I could really wrap my mind around it. But I also realized, like, the mountains had actually taught me this first. So if you think about it, 2018, that's several years after I had like gotten into the outdoors. So I had a lot of experience in the mountains under my belt at this time. And I was like, wow, like that's so true, because I could relate it to this experience that I had in the mountains. The mountains taught me like the adventure lives within both the highlights and the lowlights. Adventure is 50-50, backpacking is 50-50. It has its good moments and it has its bad moments, its tough moments, and it's just like life. So I had even gotten like, even before I did like found this coach, she told me this concept, she called it 50-50 experience. I had already gotten a tattoo before I even heard about this from her on my arm that said, "On life and mountains, it is the same." So I could already tell like I was kind of coming to these conclusions to myself, because it's something that I had felt and like learned deeply from my experiences out there on the trail. And for me, this concept of life being 50-50 is like very grounding. It really reminds me that nothing has gone wrong, especially when I'm up against something hard or challenging or even painful. The mountains taught me that this is like part of the whole process. It's part of the adventure. It's part of being a human in this life. And so like, if you're only imagining or only interested in the highs, the epic summit views, like the vistas, the beautiful colors, wildflowers, like the smiles, the friendship, right? If you're only interested in those things, then you're going to be disappointed, because that's only half the story for any great adventure. Like, you cannot embark on something big in the mountains or outside of your comfort zone without its own dose of uphills or bad weather or like, what the heck have I got myself into kind of moments, right? Like, this is just how it is. And for me, this is really great news, because I've really learned to love the side of the adventure experience, where you do kind of like see yourself push through those challenges. And I talk about this a lot, kind of this aha moment that I've had really recently, kind of this full circle moment that I've just recognized myself reaching in episode 21. I think that is called "What the Royal Archloop Revealed About Who I've Become." I talk about this sort of experience that I've been having lately with tough adventures, especially like very like 50-50 experience adventures. Because I mean, sometimes you go out and it's like a really easy trip and there's not as much bad, but there usually is, some element of 50-50 no matter what you do. But to have that experience and like know this concept so deeply from my experience in the mountains, it really grounds me for my expectations for my life, especially when I have big goals, right? And secondly, like, it helps me normalize the low moments, that no matter what path that I choose, like whatever possibility I'm trying to create, whatever dream I'm trying to like bring to life, I know I can go into that knowing that it will come with its own flavor of 50-50. And not going for it will also come with its own flavor of 50-50. So if you think about, like, so many people are scared to go for it, but they don't realize, like, maybe you don't have to deal with some of the tough challenges that come with going for it, but you're always going to be like, you're going to be sitting on the couch wondering, what if? Like, what if I had gone for it? What would things be like? And there's kind of that like nagging at your soul of like wondering what you could have created if you hadn't been too scared to kind of just embrace the negative emotion that comes with going for it, is the best way that I can put it. So we tend to think like there's this path that we choose where it's better or we're happier. But I do really believe that the mountains teach us that even on the trail, even with epic panorama vistas, it's going to come with its own dose of 50-50. And for me, I find that very, very comforting. So that is the first concept. The second concept that the mountains have taught me, and it relates to the coaching tools, is that failure is part of any great adventure process. So I think I kind of just talked about this a little bit. The biggest thing that holds people back in life is when they start questioning themselves and their dreams. Like, but what if it doesn't work out? what if I fail, et cetera, et cetera. This can sound like a lot of different things. Just depends on your flavor of like questioning yourself, right? So the fear of failure is the thing that stops people from going for it. But the mountains have taught me that failure is just part of any great adventure process. So, of course, it would be amazing if every time that we went to summit a peak or embark on a big adventure, if everything went super like smoothly and perfectly, exactly how we planned. But that is just not how the mountains work. And that's not how adventures work, at least not the majority of the ones that I've been on. And it's not how life works. So instead of arguing with that reality, I find it really comforting to know that the mountains have taught me how to handle failure and to use this as a learning tool, and that it doesn't have to be the end of my story. So I have failed on a countless amount of summit attempts. Like so many times, like I talk to my clients and they think that I just don't have these kind of failures. And I hope with this podcast that I can really kind of unearth some of the reality of the failures that I do encounter. But when I was first getting started, I can't tell you, like I can't even think about on the number of my hands, like how many summits I went out to do and got turned around for different reasons. I can remember this summit attempt of a peak in Utah that my friend and I did. And we were so close to the summit. We were like 500 feet away. And then his knee was like giving him so much issues. And I didn't want to leave him behind. And it was kind of like a very blizzardy-esque type day, not like super dangerous or anything, but it was like harder to see. And we were tired, and it was just like, okay, let's just turn around. And so we made the call to turn around. There have been times that I've gone out to do a summit. I can remember one in California where we were going to do Split Mountain. I think it was Split Mountain, or no, maybe it was Middle Palisade. It was a 14er in California. We went to go do Middle Palisade, and I got altitude sick, which it doesn't usually happen to me, or at least it didn't as much because I used to know like what worked well for me. But for some reason on that trip, like I just struggled with it. And yeah, we basically just made it to the lake before the actual summit attempt and opted not to go because I needed like more of my vigor to do that summit in particular, because it took a little bit more focus. It took a little bit more being there. It was I can't remember if it was class 3 or class 2, but it was just something I wasn't willing to do, not feeling better. And it's funny, I mentioned Split Mountain. That was another summit attempt that we turned around because a big storm cloud rolled over. So there are a lot of summits that I got so close to and didn't summit. And another example I can think of is Michael and I planned a through hike of the John Muir Trail. And we actually had our first attempt of that was in 2020. And we got kicked off the John Muir Trail. Like literally they made everyone leave the national forest 12 days in because there was some really big wildfires. And so it was like a legitimate concern, but we were planning to do that in 22 days and we got kicked off about halfway into our trip. And I remember that being really, really disappointing at the time. But what came out of that failure was a really epic training tool that I was actually able to record and prepare for my students in the Backpacking Badass program on wildfire safety and communication planning during wildfire season. Because Michael and I, when we got out of that experience, yes, it was a really big bummer, but we were like very calm through the whole process because we had a really good safety contact in place. We already knew about the wildfires and having to exit before we even saw the signs from the rangers on the trail. So I just went and took that failure and I turned it into something valuable that I could give back to my clients. And it also wasn't the end of my story. We did end up going back to the John Muir Trail in 2021, and we finished it. So at the end of the day, like we can choose the great adventure, which includes its own set of failures, or another way to put that is like it includes its own set of plot twists, right? Or we can just hide away for the rest of our lives, keeping ourselves small, not going after what we really want because we're scared of the emotion that we feel from failure. And for me, I choose the failure with the great adventure path. And if you can learn to choose this for yourself on the trail, like I know so many of you who go out and do things and you have experienced this failure too, if you can get good at doing that on the trail, you can apply this in so many areas of your life. And an example of that is like, I don't think I would have been as brave or courageous or would even have entertained starting my own business if I had not first learned this lesson about failure from the mountains. So that is concept number 2. The third concept is that our thoughts are so essential in how we show up and experience our world. So let me illustrate this with an example from one of my coaching calls that I had with a Backpacking Badass student. So my client in that program, we do these monthly mindset coaching calls. That's just like one of the benefits of being in that program. We do Q&A calls and we do monthly mindset coaching calls where you can just come with anything and we like coach on it, right? So that client came to me with this. She told me, she said, I'm planning a backpacking trip with friends and my sister who are experts, and I find myself constantly apologizing just for even existing. I'm struggling with allowing myself to still be learning and not judge myself about it. And so when she told me that, like, we pulled out, I decided to like dig deeper with her. I was like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's pull out a specific example and explore it and get curious. Because this is what we do in coaching. We're like, oh, that's really interesting. Like what you just said, like, let's dig into it. Let's explore this a little bit more. And so she gave me a specific example of like when she had felt this before. So she said, in September, she went on a backpacking trip in Washington. Her sister's a very experienced backpacker. And for her, it ended up being more than she felt like she should have signed up for. She felt like it was too difficult for where she was back then. Back then, she wasn't in the Backpacking Badass program. She goes, since that trip, I did sign up for the Backpacking Badass program. I started learning more, but I'm feeling stuck again now that we're wanting to plan another trip this year. I find myself making self-effacing jokes, not feeling confident, thinking I should be further along, feeling responsible for putting my sister in a tough situation last year, and I feel like I need to redeem myself. So one of the coaching tools that I teach my clients inside of the Adventurous Reinvention experience, like if that was something you were considering or might join us with this summer, we teach a tool called the model. And the model is literally just a thought work tool that allows us to be an observer of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions, etc., and see how they are playing out for us in our real life. I like to think of it like as a curiosity tool. It's something that really like lets us step out of our shame and into a state of curiosity about ourselves, almost kind of like we can put it on paper and just be like, like I'm wondering why I'm believing this, or I wonder why I'm feeling this way, or I wonder why I'm acting this way, or I wonder why I'm getting this result. It helps take us out of the drama of it. Like I often tell my clients is sometimes when we stay in our brains, like, and with our thoughts, we keep them in our brains. We don't put them on paper. We can never observe them. When we just keep them in there, it feels so real and like hard to escape. But if we can kind of put our thoughts onto paper and really just detach from them for just a minute, you know, like we can take them back and be in our mind drama after, but like step aside for a minute and like detach and just look at them for what they are. It really helps us drop into like an observer mode, like almost like that friend who is really going to support you and kind of like help you see things clearly. So we did this with my client. We took her example and like we explored it more with this coaching tool. And what we saw when we explored it more was that like, okay, she was planning a trip that summer with her sister after what she considered a failed trip with her sister in the past. And her dominating thought about this trip was, I need to redeem myself. And that thought, I need to redeem myself, just made her feel incompetent. And because she felt incompetent, because she was believing that she needed to redeem herself, she found herself apologizing for not being qualified, making jokes at her own expense, and second guessing herself, like just in this never ending loop of doing those things. And the result of doing those things, because she felt incompetent, because she was thinking this thought, I need to redeem myself, like over and over again, the result of all of that was that she never felt competent or confident enough for the upcoming trip. So we kind of like put that all on the whiteboard. Sometimes I like pull up a whiteboard during one of my sessions and we looked at it. We're like, okay, so interesting, right? That this thought, I need to redeem myself, is creating all of this, right? And exploring that scenario really showed us a lot. And for her, it was like a really big aha moment. Like she was putting so much pressure on herself to be an expert already when she was still very, very new to backpacking. Her very first trip, she was like very brand new. She didn't even have the Backpacking Badass program. She didn't have any of the tools to like learn how to be self-sufficient. That was a lot of pressure and it wasn't doing her any favors. And then from there, we talked about, all right, what if this upcoming trip wasn't about redeeming herself? Like we were just trying to flip it on its head a little bit. Like explore how she was currently defining her success in this trip as redeeming herself. But what if we explored a different way, like how to view it? And I asked her, like, if we believed that this trip isn't about redeeming yourself, how would you like to define success for this trip? And then from there, we got to talk about like all the ways we would rather be like measuring success for this trip, and not by like some really hard to measure, I redeem myself, right? And we talked about her like going through more of the program, learning to be more self-sufficient, being really involved in the process, like bringing her sister in on the dialogue and being like a really big group contributor to that adventure. And then so we were able to shift that internal dialogue that she was having from pressure to curiosity. And it ended up being like a really beautiful conversation. It illustrated perfectly how essential it is to like really be onto ourselves, like really be aware of how our thoughts are impacting the way we're showing up and the results we are creating in our life. So she got to go from like being very anxious about this trip to really excited about it because she saw all the ways that she could be very successful when she took the pressure off of having to redeem herself, right? She had nothing she needed to redeem, right? Her original thinking was literally shaping her experience. So we shifted it and it changed things, right? So this is the power of self-coaching. Like I obviously, when I did this with her, it was in a coaching container. So like I was helping her kind of evaluate this process, but we can also do these kinds of things on our own. And that's something that we talk about in our adventurous reinvention experience, is like how to do that process and be onto yourself and look at your thoughts and like shift the perspective and the internal dialogue. Because your adventure experience and in life, like it's not just about your skills, it's about what's happening inside of your mind. So you've probably already been coaching yourself out there on adventures without even realizing it or understanding. Like maybe I've given a few examples here and you're like, oh, I've done that before. I remember being out on Mount Rainier. I was on the summit. We had finally made it to the summit of Mount Rainier. We had gone up a route called Couts Icefall, I believe is what it was called. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done in my life at that point. I want to say it was like 2015 or 2016. And I was at the summit. And it's funny because you look back at pictures of me on the summit, I'm smiling. Everyone else is smiling. We're having a great time. But what I remember about that experience of being on Mount Rainier is just like staring back at where I just climbed up and going into like full freak out mode. My brain was like, I cannot do this. I cannot go down what I just came up. I'm terrified. I can't do this. It was like on a loop. Like there's no way I can do this. I don't want to do this. I can't go down what I came up. I'm scared. It was like a nonstop loop in my brain. And I was crying on the top of Mount Rainier. I had like glasses on, so you couldn't really see it. So behind my sunglasses, I was just like tears, right? Not happy tears, terrified tears. Like, of course, I was excited we made it to the summit, but then I was like, oh shit, this is only half the journey. I still have to make it down. And it was like one of the hardest things I had already done. And that was only like halfway. And I know that going down is even more dangerous. You need even more focus. So I was very scared in that moment. But before I even knew what coaching was, I did have a friend and like what I considered at the time one of my mentors on that trip. He did exactly what a great coach does. Like he offered me a new thought. I remember I went up to him and I kind of told him I was panicking on the inside and told him all my thoughts, like, I can't do it. And I was like, can't we go down the easier way? Like, I put that in quotation marks. You can't see it right now, but the most popular route up Mount Rainier, I think, is called Disappointment Cleaver. And so it's supposed to be like the easier one. That doesn't mean it's easy, but it's like the easier technically route. And I was like, can't we just go down Disappointment Cleaver? And he's like, of course you can do this. Like, you just came up that, you can go down it. Also, it's better to go with the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And that was just like 2 words of wisdom I'll never forget. That, the encouragement of like, I can do it, like regrounding myself, like I just did it and I can go down it, right? And better to go with the devil you know than the devil you don't know had a lot of wisdom in it as well, because we knew exactly what challenges we were up against of what we came up. But if we were to go down a different route, it's like we hadn't prepared for it. We hadn't planned for that. We didn't know where the hard parts were, like what things we might need to be aware of. It could be like this whole different ballgame of scary, right? And I decided he was right. So I took a deep breath, like let myself like experience the emotion of fear and let it roll through me, and then absorb the new thought that he gave me. And I found like I was able to like move again and shift into, I can do this. I will do this because I must do this. And kind of like a let's freaking go, like bring it on kind of attitude. And yeah, like it's quite interesting how you can go from panic state to like calm confidence. This is something I talk about a lot with my clients. It's like that skill, learning how to do that skill is very important, right? That shift, that tiny change in perspective, it completely changed how I moved through that particular challenge in the moment. And I did make it down Rainier safely. I mean, obviously I'm here. And what's most important is I made it down Rainier safely, which with a calmer confidence than I had on the summit. Like I was freaking out on the summit. But if I had kept believing the thought, like I can't do this, then I like know for sure that my experience of going down Mount Rainier, I would have been shaky. I would have been scared the whole time. I probably would have been very unfocused and probably unsafe. I probably would have made mistakes. I could have even made it unsafe for my rope team because we were all roped up into different like 4-person teams. And so it's really important sometimes, especially like in the mountains, especially if you're doing really big technical things, to learn how to shift those thoughts in your mind, because when you're in a scary moment, you can't let that dictate how you show up, because you need to drop into the calm confidence in order to get down safely. It doesn't mean the fear is it's gone. I didn't go to being fearless, but I just shifted into focusing on I can do this, like one step at a time, like let's do this, instead of focusing on the thing that was like terrifying me, right? So learning how to coach yourself in the mountains, it can be so key to your safety. And we have to learn how to shift the conversation so that when we are scared in the moment, we can tap into something new, we can make safer decisions, and we can move through any of those scary situations that we might come up against on an adventure. And again, it's not about ignoring the fear. It's about learning to shift your inner dialogue on purpose. And what's great is that this is a tool. Like this experience that I had in Rainier, it's like so applicable to things that I've also experienced in life, because, you may be trying to build a business or, going after something that you've always wanted in your real life, like outside of the trail, and experience that same kind of like fear, like I can't do this. Like I don't want to keep going, or you have some sort of like shame or like embarrassment or some negative emotion, right? If we can learn to like process that emotion fully and step into a new focus, it really can make the entire difference in our lives and what we want to create. So I hope through all of this, I've kind of shown you a few examples in this episode on 1, how the mountains are a powerful teacher, and 2, how learning to utilize these concepts that we learn from the mountains with the combination of like self-coaching tools, how it can be such a powerful force in your life. Because coaching and self-coaching, it isn't just about adventure. It's about feeling better, not because life is easy, but because you have the tools to handle anything that comes your way. It's about learning how to process your emotions instead of avoiding them. That way you can go do big things, because when we do big things, we're going to have emotions that are uncomfortable and we need to learn how to process them and move through them. It's about learning how to create different results in your life by shifting your thoughts. Just like we talked about with my client, thinking I need to redeem myself, to being like, this is what success looks like for me on this trip, and really focusing in on that. It's about becoming more conscious of what's driving your actions, right? That way we can make a different choice. It's like being really purposeful and intentional with our mind. It's about thinking more deliberately instead of running on autopilot. So many of us, we're just on autopilot. It makes sense. Our brains are meant to be efficient. So if we're not actively working to see maybe the ways that our brain is holding us back in the effort to be efficient, then we're going to struggle to step into new ways of seeing ourselves and identifying, right? It's about manifesting the life that we actually want to be living. It's about noticing negative thought patterns before they really fully take over your life. And it's about intentionally learning how to create positive thinking and positive emotions. And it's not to be I really embrace the 50-50, y'all. When I have negative emotions, I'm not oh, I need to instantly make this a positive thought. It's not about toxic positivity. It's really about learning to process those negative emotions, really feel them, not just let them dictate how everything else happens in your life. There is a difference. And that is where you can take back your personal power, is just learning, I'm experiencing this negative emotion, nothing has gone wrong. And then deciding on purpose how you want to move forward, instead of kind of just dropping into that autopilot kind of way of living your life. So the best part is, if you're already coaching yourself in the mountains, maybe you didn't even realize you were doing it, but you might even be doing it. You can do this in every area of your life. And if you're excited to learn more about these tools that I started talking about today, how to use them to create a life that makes you feel as alive as you do on the trail, then this is exactly the kind of work that we do inside of the Adventurous Reinvention experience. One of the very first things that you'll get access to, actually, if you join us in that program, is an overview of how you can start using the model, the self-coaching tools right away. That's something I'm going to have available for you as soon as you join. And you can start instantly using that to shift anything in your life. And then throughout the whole summer, we're going to be using that. And also I have a process of walking you through creating a personal reinvention in your life that we'll be going through together in kind of 4 core phases throughout the summer. So we'll be talking about that too, but along the way, we will be using self-coaching tools to become curious and observers of our thoughts. And I think what's so important about this is we are rarely taught how to think. We just assume, we just have thoughts and those are reality, right? Or we aren't taught how to question what we're thinking, or how to manage what we're thinking, or how to choose thoughts on purpose. And really what this all gets into is that there are 2 ways that we get to live our life, right? By default, or on autopilot, so to speak, where we're kind of just letting our mind, which is trying to be as efficient as possible, dictate the shots, be on autopilot, right? Or we can learn how to live our life on purpose and more deliberately going after those things that we say we've always wanted to go after. And in the Adventurous Reinvention experience, we're going to step into living our lives on purpose and with purpose. We're going to bring those big, beautiful dreams that all of you have to life and stop holding yourself back. And we're going to have those tough conversations about things that we're scared of and have been giving us self-doubt, and working through all of those things together. So that is kind of the end of today's episode. If this conversation has resonated with you at all, you want to go deeper into this work, this is what we do inside the Adventurous Reinvention experience. Again, we only open enrollment once a year. We're opening up very soon in April. Spots are very limited. So if you want to be part of this incredible experience, Get on the wait list now. Go to shedreamsofalpine.com/ARE. The waitlisters will get to hear about it first before we open it up to the public. And I'm just so excited, y'all. I was just talking to my team member, Kelly. This is like one of our favorite times of the year when we get to do this work. We get to coach together all summer. We're also all physically training together. I mean, maybe not physically together because we all live in different areas, but we're all going through a training plan together, feeling mentally and physically strong. And then we're going into the mountains at the end of the summer together on an experience that we get to really experience together and absorb all of this stuff at the end of our time together. And tie it all together. I think I just said together 10 times, but yeah, that's kind of what this experience is like. So we're very excited to do this again. It's one of our favorite times of the year, and I cannot wait to see and meet the women who decide to join us inside of that experience. So, okay, my friends, that is it for today. I hope this episode gave you something to think about, whether you're on the trail or navigating your own life reinvention, and I'll speak to you guys next week. Until next time, bye. Hey, I wanted to thank you real quick for tuning into the show and listening all the way to the end. If you love this episode and you want deeper support in becoming a safe, confident, and self-sufficient hiker and backpacker, then head over to shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist to learn more about our Backpacking Badass coaching program, where I teach you absolutely everything you need to know to be self-reliant on the trails and stop waiting around on others for the adventure invite. So I'd love to help you more in your journey of stepping into your adventurous identity, and that program is the absolute best place for us to start working together. So again, that's shedreamsofalpine.com/waitlist, and you can learn all about it there. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you get to spend some time outside this week, and I'll be back very soon with a brand new episode. Bye.